Got it. One time, for whatever reason, I was shown an ad for a hunting knife and I accidentally clicked it. And I don't hunt. I don't need a hunting knife. But then they were everywhere and I couldn't escape them. And I was like, guys, what a waste. Please.
Totally. And so many of these things are just like, they're callous in their approach. And you just see people just, lighting $100 bills on fire. And so to me, like what AMC allows us to do is figure out what is actually performant and reward those publishers. And I think that's actually great for the open web in the sense that the publishers that are creating value are going to get paid.
Facts right there. Welcome back to the Commerce Collective, a podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where one of our digital commerce experts covers the most important e-commerce stories each month. And this is your November 2023 recap, aka Black Friday Cyber Monday recap. I'm Emma Irwin, Senior Editor and Specialist at Flywheel, and I have Patrick Miller here with me, co-founder and co-president of Flywheel. Patrick, how are you today? Have you recovered from Thanksgiving/Black Friday Cyber Monday that was 11 days long?
Yeah. It went from Turkey 5 to Turkey Infinity. I think we're in the turkey for next year already. So as the deals keep coming. But yes, bouncing back. Okay.
What I think the world wants to know, something you purchased during the deals event.
Okay, well, the deals was since they started back in August. Two things I purchased. It's sort of total opposite ends. One, antibiotic for my 2-year-old who had an ear infection, and two, this gray sweater from Temu. And so what I thought was interesting and the sort of the difference between the two. So like on the buying the antibiotic for my 2-year-old, my wife's a doctor. She called in the prescription. I go to the CVS and then like on the way, like they text me and they're like, oh, okay. Like, hey, your prescription's ready or whatever. I get there and I buy it and I use Apple Pay and I check out and it was, nice, fine experience. Was that e-commerce or not? Like, I got a text on my phone, but my wife called it in on her cell phone. I don't know. Like, how does CVS book it? And so that just made me think about like how all these different companies are booking what e-commerce is, what it isn't. And then at the end of the day, like it's just commerce and we all carry around phones. So to me, it's a more interesting question of like, well, what are effective ways, to grow these businesses? And then on the other end, I got this gray sweater. I was like, all right, so I'm seeing these Temu ads absolutely everywhere. And I'm like, all right, well, like, let's just roll the dice and find out what this thing is. It ain't bad. $30, like 100% wool sweater. And it showed up pretty quickly, like a week. And, like on the back, like take it out. And like there are no tags. There is no brand. But, like compare it to like the J. Crew sweater I've had for a couple of years, and it's kind of pretty similar. So, and then it's sort of looking more and more at Temu, and then Shein getting ready to list the IPO. It's like reading online of like folks talking about like, well, where are they adding incremental GMV across the entire industry, or who are they taking from? And a lot of folks are talking about they're taking from, dollar class of trade, Dollar General, Dollar Store, Five Below, et cetera, which is probably true. But I think the one that people aren't talking about yet is like, what are these companies doing to the aggregators? And so somebody like a Thrashio, who's now getting ready to file for bankruptcy and all the other ones are struggling. And if you look at the products that they mostly, bought, and I say products, not brands, because they weren't brands, even though they all pretend that they're brands, they're very similar to what you can buy on Temu. And so, but unfortunately, like when you sell through, Amazon's core strength is the logistics network, but you got to pay for that. And so what Temu is doing is saying, hey, you know what? Patrick probably doesn't care if his gray sweater gets to him, in 2 hours or a week. And they're right. And they can save a whole bunch of money. And so is Temu actually, really attacking the aggregators, first and foremost, and sort of the plethora of companies that they bought. So just something to think about.
Interesting. On Cyber Monday, I bought a new jacket from Uniqlo, who did something interesting. And I don't know if they did like the full 11-day deals, but from like Thanksgiving to Cyber Monday, each day, only certain items were on like a mega deal. So I had to wait for that jacket because I was like, they have to put this one jacket that I want on deal. And it was on Cyber Monday. But I moved to Arkansas, sold my jacket that was from Minnesota. So it was like a polar vortex jacket. And then I woke up one morning and it was 10 degrees when I went to work. And I was like, what? So now I need a big jacket again. And I can't avoid the big jacket.
Well, it's cold. You need to bundle up. And buying apparel is the most fascinating, online because it's so fractured, and figuring out like what fits. It is, yeah, I think it's, really an interesting one.
Okay, so today, obviously, we're talking exclusively about Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and all of the days before and in between. So I want to first start with your overall hot take on the event without getting deep into the data. Did this go how you expected it to?
Yeah, for the most part, deals, but deals for different reasons. Last year, folks were long on inventory, and some categories still are long on inventory. And so folks were, doing deals to get inventory back to where, sustainable levels. This year, you have a consumer who is, less confident and is looking for deals in the face of, a couple of years of compounding inflation. And so it was almost like, if it wasn't 25% off, like it was like everything was 25% off, especially in hard lines. And so, that's absolutely propelled it. Brands that did deals did well. Brands that didn't. Consumer wants deals. And so it was all about having a great deal, being in stock, and, and then offering that to the consumer.
Makes sense. And so now to get into the data that everyone is waiting for, I want to know what metrics stood out to you or surprised you or disappointed you, which ones made you feel something. But before we do that, I want to prove that I have some brain cells. So I'm going to go over some higher level kind of data that we have. And this is North America, Amazon specific. But I did think it was interesting. Black Friday and Cyber Monday were both up versus a year ago. But interestingly, Cyber Monday performed better than Black Friday in terms of year-over-year growth. So maybe consumers didn't feel that deal fatigue. I don't know. CPCs through the roof. That was kind of to be expected, though. Conversion for the full period was down versus last year, but conversion was actually up versus Black Friday and Cyber Monday a year ago. So those lead-in days, I think people were kind of wishy-washy and then waited to convert. And then ASPs were lower across the event versus last year. So maybe deals were deeper, maybe deals were bigger. But now I'll pass it off to you to get your take.
Sure. So I guess a couple of things. One, last year, Amazon ran Turkey Infinity in the EU, and they had to lap it this year, which, created some moderation there. However, they learned that it worked really well. So what they were able to do is then run that in the States this year, and they pull forward demand. And so it's sort of like, you almost have like the stacking of like the Ps or whatever they're calling it now. And then you have like Turkey Infinity. And so like they keep pulling demand forward and doing really, really well. Now, I then contrast that with like when we actually look at hourly data and, sort of using total retail data, not the ads data, to see sort of how customers are shopping during the time period. And if you think about it sort of like as a U on, sort of with, Black Friday as the start and then Cyber Monday as the end. And what's really interesting is sort of like you have like this enormous spike in the very, very beginning of Black Friday. So like it's sort of like a virtual doorbuster. People are queuing up, they go to see what the deals are. And then it's shallow and it makes sense. But then what was fascinating to me is that like at the end of Cyber Monday, there's another huge spike. And so, it's people that are saying at like the end of Cyber Monday, they haven't found anything. Well, everything's on deal. It's not going to be on deal tomorrow. I got to go run to the store. And so it was, looking at the hourly data, I thought was really, really interesting.
That is interesting. I wonder if people also, like, I sometimes wonder, maybe they'll increase the deals. Like they'll put a greater percentage to like sell through some inventory at the very end of Cyber Monday if you're like, you aren't hitting the expectations.
Well, I think that's where it's going and sort of giving like right now, like, we can turn knobs in real time, on the advertising side, the deals is a little bit harder. And part of that's driven by, and you certainly can work with your vendor manager to put more stuff on deal, but like they haven't given real time dials yet. And I would expect, for vendors in the future that they will increase that ability so that it can be vendor managed inventory.
That would be really cool because I bet the average person doesn't know that we can't change that stuff in real time. So maybe someday. Okay. Two assumptions that I had was that like a lead-in would take away from Black Friday and Cyber Monday themselves, which we kind of saw was just not really true. And then deal fatigue was predicted, but it didn't really happen. So I'm curious, do you think that will happen in the future with this proof that Amazon has to kind of increase the lead-in?
Yeah, I mean, eventually there's deal fatigue when the deals aren't sincere. And so, and to me, like when I looked at the deals, like they were sincere. And there've been certain years where like sort of like the deals aren't as sincere or like they're not as deep, and so they don't work as well. But this year, like the deals were deep, and so it sort of spurred people to buy. I'm sort of curious, like as inflation moderates, what happens, and as customers sort of get used to sort of where we are, and we're not as in much of an inflationary environment. Like what does that then do to deal seeking? And then also then sort of comparing, like when I look at various brands' earnings of like their dollar growth is grows above their unit growth. And, that's fine. But like, it's like, sort of like at a certain point there, they have to get the unit growth back, which is going to create, the only way to do that, oftentimes is moderation of price, so we'll see sort of how that shakes out, longer term. But to me, it's like Amazon keeps pulling people forward, we'll see and what happens when they lap it next year. But I think the earlier is here to stay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured you would say. Okay, a random tidbit just because, everything we talk about is very, for the most part, very digital focused. But I did find it super interesting. I was looking through Numerators kind of reporting on this, but there was still like a good portion of people who only shopped in store for the entire event. And then an even bigger portion of people that still shopped primarily in store, which was absolutely fascinating to me because the Gen Z internet sphere is like, whatever happened to Black Friday, where you went after Thanksgiving dinner and went out to the store? It seems like no one goes to the store. But like data says otherwise, and people still do actually go to the store. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to go to the store. I mean, there's, sort of wonderful experiences. And like one of the things, especially when you don't have intent. And so like if I have intent, like search, click, buy, bounce. But like, if I'm going to my cell phone, you don't have the visibility that you do, the peripheral visibility that you do with your eyes, looking at a cell phone. And so like to me, like browsing in a well merchandised store is enjoyable. And at least when I don't have a 2 and a 3-year-old with me. In that case, like I'm ordering online, but for the love of God, please deliver it. And so I think increasingly what stores are realizing is that they're not just asking for people's money, they're asking for people's time. And if it can be an enjoyable use of that time or provide additional savings or unique selection, yeah, people are going to go to the store because they want to. It's like I look at independent bookstores and just like, one down the street from us where it's like, yeah, people want to go there because they have events and people want to spend time in there. That's a great way to combat online retailers. And same thing on the service vector. I have a couple of good friends that own a bike shop, and it's just like, okay, well, how do they get people in? Well, they teach maintenance classes and they pull people in. They show them how to work on their bikes. You can't do that online. And so like there's something like it's never going to shift all to online, and nor should it. There's a really important place for physical retail and a really important place, for digital retail. And that's why I think that, sort of where we started, like the dichotomy of like, is it e-commerce, is it not? Well, it's just commerce, and we all have cell phones.
True that. We all have cell phones, for better or for worse. Okay. So we don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have like complete AMC data for all of the days in the event yet. But I'm curious what you expect to see because, we made a big point that, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is really the time to capture those new to brand shoppers and then track their lifetime value. So I'm curious, do you expect to see our research kind of prove true here? And what also metrics are we looking at that don't have to do to new to brand that you get through AMC, like some of those repeat purchasing brand loyal customers?
We've been working with AMC for years, at this point. And, I think it's, one of the most valuable things that Amazon's ever built. And when we look at, historically, we tend to see that you sort of have like, am I a one-time purchase or am I a repeat purchase? So am I hard lines or am I CPG, or hard lines or soft lines? And then, so what we see typically like on, tentpole events, and if I go back to Prime Day, is a lot of times like a customer will come in on Prime Day, they'll be a new to brand, but they're price sensitive. And so when they repeat when the item goes on deal again, i.e., Cyber 5. And I expect to see sort of a lot of those, people that come in that they're repeating, their deal seekers. The trick is afterwards, seeing sort of what happens. And to me, it's for brands, it's figuring out like what is the margin impact of these deals, of these advertising, and does it make sense, over a longer period of time? We were looking at one sports nutrition brand, and we compared the, sort of the performance of Prime Day, Cyber 5, and New Year, New You. They're 3 big tentpoles of the year. And by far the best value was New Year, New You, because the people stuck around and they kept buying. And so I think there is a, sort of context, sort of how you're selling. And a lot of times during Cyber 5, it's gift giving. And so the margin has to make sense. You're not just buying for yourself, you're buying for others. So you're not necessarily going to repeat, like you would on some of the other events, where you are just buying for yourself. So I think that's a huge one for brands to think about. But if it is profitable and, even with the deals, then like absolutely go do it. And there is value in sort of the insights that you get via AMC to then sort of remarket to those folks. Now, on the second question of like, what are the interesting stats? To me, I think a fascinating one is sort of the value of the impression on non-O&O. So if I'm on O&O, i.e. Amazon.com, well, I pay a premium for those impressions because like the efficacy is so high. But then I look at like the rest of the sites, and guess what? A lot of the open internet, a lot of these apps, it's absolute garbage. You open up these game apps and like there's just ads all over it, and like you can't help but click on the ads, but you didn't mean to. And so you end up getting a whole lot of false positives. And so I think that the industry is going to shift a ton in the next year or so in getting away from garbage apps and getting away from garbage inventory. But before, brands have never had a way to measure outside of regression what is the efficacy, of this advertising, because they would then say like, oh, I'm going to look at like click-through rate, or I'm going to look at reach. Well, a reach to like, somebody who's not paying attention or can't see the ad, or a click that isn't sincere and is a fat thumb is a waste of money. And so, I think figuring out where is the performant inventory, where are the performant publishers, and not trading just on, guess what? You know why the CPMs are cheap? Because it's garbage. When the CPMs are higher, you're now trading on value oftentimes. And I think this becomes even more true when we start thinking about streaming television and, the value, and the sort of the half-life of that impression and view, and then what does customers do afterwards?
Got it. One time, for whatever reason, I was shown an ad for a hunting knife and I accidentally clicked it. And I don't hunt. I don't need a hunting knife. But then they were everywhere and I couldn't escape them. And I was like, guys, what a waste. Please.
Totally. And so many of these things are just like, they're callous in their approach, and you just see people just, lighting $100 bills on fire. And so to me, like what AMC allows us to do is figure out what is actually performant and reward those publishers. And I think that's actually great for the open web in the sense that the publishers that are creating value are going to get paid. And like all like just the made for ad sites, like for the love of God, have you ever looked up like trying to cook a recipe and you go to like search whatever and like you got to scroll for like 10 minutes just to find out like, hey, what's the temperature for chicken? Like to make sure my kids don't get sick. And like, that's an awful experience. And guess what? Like all those ads, all these people are putting ads on there. Like, I'm not going to buy your stuff just because your ads are so obnoxious on this awful site. And yeah, they're gaming Google, but there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I'm excited about shifting ads towards the performance sites and away from this just garbage inventory.
Facts right there. Okay. I think we can begin to wrap it up. So of course I have to ask you what you are most excited for. We're at the end of November. We're going to go into December, end the year. What are you the most excited for ending the year 2023?
God, I didn't think about that. I don't like waking up every morning. Actually, you know what I'm excited about is waking up a little bit later, because like my youngest is waking up at like 4:30 consistently, and so like and they're both sick, and so I'm like okay, great, I'm up at 4:30 with a 2 and a 3-year-old, but like so I get to talk to like my British friends a lot because they're all up obviously, so I'm excited about them sleeping in. That is they used to sleep until 7, and that has not happened in a long time, but I have hope.
Oh, and I complain that my dogs want to get up at like 7 and people are out here with children at 4 o'clock. And that's it for this month's e-commerce news. We'll catch up with you after the holidays, and be sure to share this episode if you enjoyed it. I'm Emma Irwin, and I'll see you next time. Hey, like what you're hearing? If you'd be interested in partnering with Flywheel to grow your e-commerce business, we have an offer for a potential audit of your catalog on Amazon, Walmart, or Target from our team. They're always curious to dive into media strategies and content optimizations, so reach out today by emailing us at audit@flywheeldigital.com, or just reach out to me directly.